The retired Navy SEAL dropped his drink so hard that amber liquid splashed across the polished oak bar. The entire room went silent. He stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then he slowly stood. "What did you just say your call sign was?" I hadn't heard that word spoken aloud in almost 15 years. I should have lied. I should have changed the subject. Instead, I answered honestly. "Hades." The old man's face lost all color. My cousin's smirk vanished. The Navy SEAL looked at me for several seconds before shaking his head. "I'll be damned." And that's when everyone at the family barbecue stopped laughing. 3 hours earlier, nobody in that lakeside restaurant had expected anything unusual. Least of all me. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 39 years old. I live outside Knoxville, Tennessee with a golden retriever named Maggie and a vegetable garden that keeps getting invaded by rabbits. Most people who meet me assume I'm a fairly ordinary woman. Honestly, that's exactly how I like it. I spent years making sure my military career stayed in the past. No framed uniforms, no medals on display, no stories, no attention. After everything that happened overseas, I preferred a quiet life. Unfortunately, my cousin Derek never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that he thought I was a joke. The barbecue had been organized for our aunt's 70th birthday. Family members had traveled from several states. Children ran across the lawn. Grandparents sat under large umbrellas near the water. Country music drifted from outdoor speakers. It should have been a pleasant afternoon. Instead, Derek arrived in one of his usual moods. Derek was the kind of man who needed an audience. At 52, he still behaved like the loudest guy in high school. Every conversation somehow became about him. Every joke had to have a target. And for years, that target had often been me, especially whenever the military came up. He never served. Not a single day. But that never stopped him from having opinions. I was carrying a tray of drinks from the bar when I heard him talking. "There she is." I sighed before even turning around. Several relatives chuckled. Derek pointed toward me. "Our family war hero." I placed the tray on a nearby table. "Afternoon, Derek." "Still saving the world?" "Not lately." "That's too bad." A few people laughed. I forced a smile. Over the years, I'd learned that arguing with Derek only encouraged him. Ignoring him usually worked better. Usually. But that afternoon, he seemed determined. "What did you actually do in the army again?" he asked loudly. Several relatives looked up. I shrugged. "Flew helicopters." Derek grinned. "Sure." A few people laughed again. I recognized the look on some of their faces. Most of them didn't actually know what I'd done. Many assumed I'd worked in administration or logistics. I had never corrected them. It wasn't worth the effort. My aunt tried to change the subject. "So Rachel, how's your garden doing?" But Derek wasn't finished. Wait. He leaned back in his chair. "I've always wondered something." I closed my eyes briefly. "Here we go." He pointed at me. "Can you actually fight?" Several relatives looked uncomfortable. Others seemed curious. The question hung in the air. I could have ignored it. I should have ignored it. Instead, I smiled. "Only hand to hand." A few eyebrows lifted. Then I added, "Knives were optional." The table erupted with laughter. Even I laughed a little. It sounded ridiculous. I knew that. Derek nearly spilled his beer. "Oh, that's good." I took a sip of iced tea. He shook his head. "You serious?" "Very." More laughter. Derek looked around for support. He found plenty. Then he delivered the line he'd probably been preparing for years. He smirked. "Let me guess." The grin spread wider. "They called you princess?" More laughter. Someone nearly choked on a hamburger. A few cousins looked embarrassed. I should have walked away. Instead, I answered, one word. Just one. "Hades." The laughter stopped almost immediately. Not because anyone understood the word. Most didn't. The reaction came from somewhere else. From the bar. The sound startled everyone. Glass hitting wood. Liquid splashing. A chair scraping backward. Every head turned. An older man had risen from his seat. Gray hair, broad shoulders despite his age. Weathered face. The look in his eyes reminded me of people I'd known long ago. People who had seen things they never discussed. He stared directly at me. Not at Derek. Not at the crowd. At me. His expression wasn't confusion. It was recognition. My stomach tightened. Because I knew exactly what kind of man he was. The Navy veteran cap was only confirmation. The old man took several steps closer. Nobody spoke. Even Derek looked uncertain now. The stranger finally stopped a few feet away. His voice was quiet. Almost reverent. "Hades." I nodded once. The old man's eyes widened. For a moment he seemed 20 years younger. Then he exhaled slowly. "I never thought I'd meet you." The silence became almost painful. Family members exchanged confused looks. Derek laughed nervously. "Okay, hold on." Nobody joined him. The old man ignored him completely. He kept staring at me. And then he said something that changed the entire afternoon. Something that made every person at that barbecue realize they had never really known me at all. "I know exactly who you are. I know exactly who you are." The old man's words landed like a stone in still water. Nobody at the table spoke. My cousin Derek looked from me to the stranger and back again. Then he laughed. Not his usual confident laugh. A nervous one. "Okay," he said. "What is this, some kind of joke?" The older man ignored him. His eyes never left mine. For a second I considered standing up and leaving. I had spent 15 years building a quiet life. 15 years making sure nobody asked questions. And now all of it was starting to unravel because of one stupid word. Hades. I should have kept my mouth shut. The Navy veteran slowly extended his hand. "Tom Walker." I shook it. His grip was strong despite his age. "Rachel Carter." He smiled faintly, as if I didn't know that already. Several family members exchanged confused looks. My aunt looked worried. My mother looked completely lost. Derek folded his arms. "Somebody mind explaining what's going on?" Tom finally looked at him. "Do you know what a call sign is?" Derek shrugged. "Something pilots use in movies." Tom didn't smile. "No, it's something earned." The table grew quiet again. Derek rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on." Tom pointed toward me. "How long have you known her?" 39 years. "And you never wondered why she doesn't talk about her service?" Derek snorted. "Maybe because there isn't much to talk about." A few people looked uncomfortable. Tom's expression hardened. I recognized that look. I'd seen it on senior NCOs and special operations officers years ago. The look people get when they lose patience. "That's where you're wrong." I stepped in before things escalated. "Tom," he looked at me. I shook my head slightly. He understood immediately. He sat back down. For a moment I thought the conversation might die there. I was wrong, because now everyone wanted answers. My mother spoke first. "Rachel, who is he?" I sighed. "A veteran." Tom chuckled. "That's one way to put it." Derek laughed. "Okay, seriously, what's the big deal about Hades?" Nobody answered immediately. Because the truth was complicated. The nickname wasn't famous. Not really. Most Americans had never heard it. Most soldiers hadn't either. But within a few very specific communities it carried weight. Not because I was special. Because of one mission. One terrible mission. One night that changed dozens of lives. Including mine. Tom leaned forward. I was a Navy SEAL for 22 years. The table fell silent again. Even Derek stopped talking. "My team heard about Hades years ago." I closed my eyes briefly. I hated where this was going. Tom continued. "Nobody knew much, just stories." Derek scoffed. "Stories." Tom nodded. "Stories about a helicopter pilot who kept showing up when things got bad. Nobody moved. Even the children nearby seemed quieter. My younger cousin Emily looked at me. "You were really a pilot." I smiled. "Yes, like actually flying helicopters." "Yes." She looked amazed. Nobody had ever asked me that before. Not seriously. Not with genuine curiosity. Tom pointed at me. "That's the problem." Everyone looked confused. "What problem?" my aunt asked. Tom answered immediately. "Most people think military service looks like a movie." He looked around the table. "They imagine heroes talking about heroics." Then he looked at me. "But the people who carry the heaviest memories usually talk the least." That sentence hit harder than I expected. Because it was true. After Afghanistan, silence had become easier. Easier than explaining. Easier than remembering. Easier than answering questions. My father finally spoke. "You never told us much." "No." "Why?" I looked down at my iced tea. Because I didn't know how to explain trauma to people who had never seen it. Because every story ended with faces I couldn't forget. Because every memory came attached to guilt. Because some people didn't come home. And I did. Because I didn't want to, I said quietly. Nobody challenged that answer. Not even Derek. For once. Tom broke the silence. She was smart. My mother frowned. "What do you mean?" Tom glanced toward me. "Most veterans spend years trying to leave certain memories behind." The words brought back images I hadn't thought about in months. Rotor blades. Dust storms. Radio traffic. Night vision goggles. Blood. Fear. Responsibility. Loss. I pushed the memories away. Not now. Not here. Derek suddenly laughed again. But it sounded forced. So what? Nobody responded. He shifted in his chair. So she flew helicopters. Big deal. The table remained silent. His confidence was starting to crack. He could feel the room changing. The audience he usually controlled was slipping away. Tom looked directly at him. Have you ever wondered why she never brags? Derek didn't answer. Tom did. Because people who need validation talk. He pointed at me. People who don't need it stay quiet. The words landed hard. Especially because everyone knew exactly who in the family constantly demanded attention. And it wasn't me. Derek's face reddened. For the first time all afternoon he looked uncomfortable. Then he said the worst thing he could have said. Anybody can make up stories. The entire table froze. Tom slowly leaned back. I already knew what was coming next. And honestly, part of me wished Derek had simply stayed quiet. Because he had just challenged the one thing Tom Walker took personally. The truth. And Tom was about to tell a story that would change everything. Tom folded his hands on the table. For the first time all afternoon, he looked less like a retired veteran enjoying a beer, and more like the kind of man people listened to when lives were on the line. Nobody interrupted him. Not even Derek. Tom glanced at me. Do you mind? I already knew what he was asking. Did I mind him telling part of the story? The truth was I did. But I was also tired. Tired of being the family punchline. Tired of watching people assume weakness because I chose silence. So I gave him a small nod. Tom turned back toward the table. About 16 years ago, my team was operating in Afghanistan. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. War suddenly felt a lot more real when someone at the table had actually been there. Tom continued. We got into trouble. His voice remained calm. Too calm. Veterans often talked that way. The worst memories usually came out in the quietest tone. We were extracting after an operation when everything went sideways. Nobody spoke. The weather was turning bad. Visibility was terrible. We had wounded men. He paused. Our options were running out. Emily leaned forward. My mother gripped her napkin. Even the children playing nearby seemed far away now. Tom pointed toward me. That's when we heard Hades was coming. My stomach tightened. I hated hearing the call sign. Not because I disliked it. Because it brought back everything attached to it. The cold. The fear. The responsibility. The faces. Tom continued. Most pilots would have turned around. Derek rolled his eyes slightly. Tom noticed. So would you. That shut him up immediately. A few family members tried not to smile. Tom wasn't being cruel. Just honest. There are times when courage and stupidity look very similar, he said. That night, nobody knew which one we were about to witness. The table remained silent. I remembered that night perfectly. The smell of aviation fuel. The vibration of the aircraft. The constant radio chatter. The weather warnings. The fear in everyone's voice. Tom continued. The helicopter arrived. His eyes found mine. And somehow she landed where nobody thought a helicopter could land. My aunt blinked. Rachel. I looked away. Tom nodded. Rachel. My father stared at me. For years, he'd believed I spent most of my military career behind a desk. Now he looked genuinely confused. Why didn't you ever tell us this? I smiled sadly. Because it wasn't the whole story. Tom nodded slowly. Exactly. That was the problem. People loved success stories. They rarely wanted the painful parts. The parts that kept veterans awake at night. The parts nobody celebrated. Tom continued. People think call signs are cool nicknames. He shook his head. Most of them come from mistakes. A few relatives laughed softly. Tom smiled. That's true. Then his expression became serious. But sometimes they're earned. Emily looked curious. So why Hades? The question hung in the air. For years I'd avoided answering it. Now there was nowhere to hide. Tom looked at me again. I nodded. Go ahead. He took a slow breath. Because whenever things became impossible, his voice softened. She still showed up. Nobody moved. Tom continued. Bad weather. Hades showed up. Enemy fire. Hades showed up. No safe landing zone. Hades showed up. The table was completely silent now. Derek shifted in his chair. For once he had nothing funny to say. Tom wasn't finished. The nickname wasn't about death. He pointed at me. It was about bringing people back from it. That hit the table harder than any dramatic story could have. Because suddenly the name made sense. My mother covered her mouth. My aunt looked emotional. My father stared at the table. And I wished I were anywhere else. Because the truth was never as glamorous as people imagined. Nobody earned that kind of reputation without paying for it. Tom knew that. I knew that. Maybe someday the rest of them would understand too. Derek finally spoke. His voice sounded smaller now. So everybody just believed these stories? Tom looked directly at him. No. What do you mean? Because stories aren't enough. The old SEAL leaned back. We believed them because survivors kept telling the same story. The word sent a chill through me. Survivors. Not soldiers. Not operators. Not heroes. Survivors. There was a difference. A huge difference. Tom continued. Different units. Different years. Different locations. Same pilot. Nobody interrupted. Then my father asked a question I hadn't expected. Were you scared? The table turned toward me. Not Tom. Me. For a moment I didn't answer. Then I laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because the question was, were you scared? Every pilot who ever flew combat missions knew the answer. Every single one. Every day. The honesty surprised them. I could see it. People expected heroes to say no. Heroes weren't supposed to admit fear. But fear was part of the job. The trick wasn't eliminating it. The trick was functioning anyway. My father nodded slowly. For the first time that afternoon, I saw something new in his eyes. Not admiration. Understanding. Maybe even regret. Tom looked around the table. Then he said quietly, most brave people are terrified. Nobody spoke. Because everybody knew he was right. The silence lasted several seconds. Then Derek made one final attempt to reclaim the room. He forced a laugh. So what? The room turned toward him. He swallowed. Lots of veterans have stories. Nobody responded. Even Derek seemed to realize how weak it sounded. Tom slowly smiled. Not a pleasant smile. The smile of someone who knew exactly what came next. You're right. Derek looked relieved. Then Tom added, but tomorrow I'll prove every word. And suddenly every person at that table wanted to know what he meant. The drive home that evening should have felt satisfying. For years, Derek had mocked me. For years, family gatherings followed the same script. A joke. A smirk. A comment about women in the military. And me pretending it didn't bother me. Now the script had finally changed. Yet I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. Maggie greeted me at the front door when I arrived home. She wagged her tail so hard her entire body moved with it. I knelt and scratched behind her ears. At least somebody's happy to see me. The old golden retriever leaned against my leg. For a few minutes I stood quietly in the kitchen while she followed me around. The house felt peaceful, safe, normal, exactly the life I'd built after leaving the army. I poured a cup of coffee and sat on the back porch. The Tennessee evening air was warm. Crickets chirped in the distance. The mountains were barely visible against the darkening sky. Then my phone rang. Tom. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Everything okay? He laughed softly. I should be asking you that. I'm fine. No, you're not. I smiled despite myself. Veterans had a way of seeing through each other. We recognized certain silences, certain expressions, certain lies, Tom continued. I may have pushed things today. You did. Sorry. I looked out toward the trees. It's all right. A pause. Then he said something unexpected. Your cousin reminds me of a lot of people I've met. I frowned. How? They mistake attention for importance. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Because Derek wasn't really my enemy. Not anymore. The truth was more complicated. He wasn't cruel because he hated me. He was cruel because he needed an audience. And suddenly, for the first time in his life, he was losing one. The next morning I woke to 23 missed messages. Most were from relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins. People who had barely spoken to me in years. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone suddenly wanted stories. Everyone wanted details. The attention made me uncomfortable. I ignored most of them. Around noon, my father called. That surprised me. My father wasn't much of a talker. Never had been. Growing up, he expressed love through actions rather than words. Fixing things. Showing up. Working hard. Not conversations. When I answered, neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, he cleared his throat. Got a minute? Sure. Another pause. I owe you an apology. I closed my eyes. That was the last thing I expected. For what? For not paying attention. The words hit harder than anything Derek had ever said. Because they were honest. My father wasn't defending himself. He wasn't making excuses. He genuinely meant it. I knew you served, he continued, but I never really asked about it. You didn't have to. Maybe I should have. I looked out across my backyard. For years I'd told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need recognition, that silence was easier, yet hearing those words still hurt. Not because he said them, because they were true. My father sighed. When your brother got his first promotion, we celebrated. I remained quiet. When you came home from deployment, he continued, I don't think I even asked what you'd been through. I swallowed. The memory suddenly returned. I remembered standing in the airport, a duffel bag over my shoulder, trying to figure out how to fit back into normal life. Everyone had expected me to simply move on, and I had tried. God knows I had tried. But some things don't stay overseas. Some things come home with you. My father spoke again. I should have done better. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I surprised myself. You did the best you knew how. A shaky laugh escaped him. Maybe. It wasn't forgiveness. Not entirely. But it was a beginning. When the call ended, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because of military stories. Not because of respect. Because of honesty. Real honesty. Something my family had avoided for a long time. Unfortunately, Derek wasn't handling things quite so well. I found that out 2 days later. My aunt called. Have you talked to him? No. He's upset. I nearly laughed. Upset. People aren't taking his side. There it was. The real issue. Not embarrassment. Not guilt. Loss of attention. For decades, Derek controlled family gatherings through humor. Now people were questioning him. And he hated it. My aunt hesitated. Then she said, he's telling people Tom exaggerated everything. Of course he was. I wasn't even angry. Just disappointed. Because deep down, I had hoped the barbecue might have taught him something. Apparently not. At least not yet. 3 days later, Tom called again. This time he sounded excited. I found someone. Immediately I knew what he meant. My stomach dropped. No. Rachel, no. He wants to talk. I stood from my chair. Absolutely not. There were certain doors I had spent 15 years keeping closed. Tom was trying to kick one open. He's alive because of you. I rubbed my forehead. Tom. He asked about Hades. The old call sign felt strange every time I heard it. Like it belonged to someone else. Someone younger. Someone stronger. Someone who existed before grief changed everything. Tom lowered his voice. He wants to thank you himself. I stared across the yard. The wind moved through the trees. Memories moved with it. Rotor blades. Radio calls. Dark mountains. A desperate rescue mission. And one terrified young soldier. A soldier nobody expected to survive. I closed my eyes. Because suddenly I knew exactly who Tom had found. And if that man spoke to my family, everything would change. The call happened on a Sunday afternoon. The entire family was gathered again. Not because of a birthday. Not because of a holiday. Because curiosity had taken over. Ever since the barbecue, everyone wanted answers, and Tom had promised proof. I almost didn't attend. Part of me wanted to stay home with Maggie and pretend none of this was happening. But another part knew that running away wouldn't solve anything. So I drove back to the same lakeside restaurant. The atmosphere felt completely different this time. Nobody was laughing when I arrived. Nobody was making jokes. Conversations lowered as I walked toward the table. For years I had been nearly invisible at family gatherings. Now everyone watched me. Honestly, I hated it. Tom was already there. So was Derek. My cousin looked tired. Not humbled. Not apologetic. Just irritated. Like a man who had lost an argument and was waiting for an opportunity to start another. I sat down. Tom nodded. You came. Barely. That earned a small smile. A waitress brought coffee. People chatted awkwardly. Nobody seemed willing to start the real conversation. Finally, Derek did it. Of course. So where's this proof? Several relatives groaned. Tom ignored them. He pulled out his phone. He's joining in a few minutes. The table immediately grew quiet. My stomach tightened. I already knew who was calling. I just wasn't ready to see him. Tom looked at me. You okay? No. He nodded. Fair. A few moments later the phone rang. Tom answered. Then turned the screen toward the center of the table. An older man appeared. Gray hair. Weathered face. Kind eyes, late 60s, maybe early 70s. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. A smile I recognized immediately. Not because I remembered his face. Because I remembered seeing that smile after he realized he was going home alive. Well, he said softly. I'll be damned. The room remained silent. The man looked directly at me. Been a long time, Hades. I swallowed. Yeah, his eyes became emotional. So it really is you. Nobody at the table moved. The moment felt strangely intimate despite the crowd, like two people briefly stepping back into a different life. Tom cleared his throat. Would you mind telling them? The older man nodded. Not at all. He looked toward the camera. My name is Frank Miller. He smiled. I'm a grandfather now. That earned a few laughs. Then his expression softened. I wasn't supposed to become one. The room immediately quieted again. Frank continued. Years ago, my unit got trapped during an operation. His voice remained calm. Matter of fact, veterans often spoke that way. The emotion stayed underneath. Several of us were wounded. He paused. The weather was awful. I remembered. God, I remembered. Tom said nothing. He didn't need to. Frank continued. We were told rescue might not reach us. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. My mother looked pale. Frank smiled slightly. Then somebody told us a pilot was coming. His eyes found mine again. A pilot named Hades. The table remained silent. Frank laughed softly. At the time I thought it sounded ridiculous. A few family members smiled. Then his expression grew serious. But she came. The words landed heavily. Not because they were dramatic. Because they were simple. Because they were true. Frank continued. Most people don't understand what courage looks like. Nobody interrupted. It usually looks terrified. I looked down. That statement felt far too accurate. Frank nodded slowly. We were all scared. Us. The crew. Everybody. He paused. But they came anyway. Several relatives were openly emotional now. Especially my mother. Frank continued. That helicopter shouldn't have landed there. Tom smiled knowingly. That's what everyone said. Frank laughed. Exactly. Then he looked directly into the camera. And because it did, he paused. I got to watch my daughter grow up. Nobody spoke. I got to walk her down the aisle. Silence. I got to meet my grandchildren. My aunt wiped tears from her eyes. Several others did the same. Frank smiled. And none of that happens if Hades doesn't show up. I wanted to disappear. Not because I disagreed. Because praise always felt uncomfortable. Especially when it involved things I couldn't fully forgive myself for. Frank wasn't finished. The funny thing is, he looked around his living room. I spent years trying to find her. That surprised me. Tom looked surprised too. Frank laughed. Nobody knew where she'd gone. I smiled faintly. That was intentional. The table laughed softly. Then Frank became serious again. Most heroes spend their lives telling everyone what they did. His eyes met mine. She spent 15 years trying not to. The room became silent. Again. Because that was the part nobody expected. The part that made the story feel real. Not the helicopter. Not the mission. Not the call sign. The silence afterward. The years spent moving on. Derek sat motionless. For the first time in my life, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Frank noticed. Everyone noticed. The older man turned toward him. You her cousin? Derek nodded. Frank smiled politely. Then you're lucky. Derek frowned. What do you mean? Frank's answer was immediate. You got 15 extra years with her. Nobody spoke. Frank continued. A lot of people didn't get that. The words hit like a hammer. Not because they were cruel. Because they were true. For the first time all afternoon, Derek looked ashamed. Truly ashamed. And for the first time, I thought he might finally be starting to understand. For the first time in years, Derek had nothing to say. No joke. No sarcastic comment. No clever comeback. Just silence. Frank's words lingered over the table long after the video call ended. You got 15 extra years with her. Nobody rushed to fill the quiet. Eventually, Tom ended the call. The screen went dark. The restaurant slowly returned to normal around us. Dishes clattered. Waitresses moved between tables. Children laughed somewhere outside. But our family sat motionless, each person lost in their own thoughts. My mother finally reached across the table and touched my hand. A simple gesture. Yet somehow it felt bigger than all the speeches. I'm proud of you. Her voice cracked. I looked away. Not because I wasn't grateful. Because I didn't know how to handle hearing those words. At 39 years old, I suddenly felt like a little girl again. A little girl who had spent most of her life trying to prove she belonged. My father cleared his throat. I am too. The table fell silent again. Then Derek stood up, without a word, without looking at anyone. He simply walked away. Several relatives watched him leave. Nobody stopped him. Tom glanced toward the door. Give him time. I wasn't so sure. For years, Derek had built his identity around being the loudest person in the room. Now he had become the smallest. And people don't always handle that gracefully. The gathering ended shortly afterward. Family members hugged me, asked questions, shared stories. Several apologized for assumptions they had made over the years. I appreciated it, but I also felt strangely disconnected from everything. The attention still made me uncomfortable. The truth was I hadn't wanted recognition. I had wanted respect. There was a difference. Recognition is about what you've done. Respect is about who you are. And respect lasts longer. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then a week. No calls from Derek. No texts. Nothing. Part of me was relieved. Part of me was disappointed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply tired. One evening I was watering tomatoes in my backyard when a truck pulled into the driveway. I immediately recognized it. Derek. I set down the hose. He climbed out slowly. No audience. No relatives. No jokes. Just him. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he walked over. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the previous week had forced him to confront something he'd spent years avoiding. He stopped several feet away. I owe you an apology. There it was. Simple. Direct. No excuses. I remained silent. He took a deep breath. I should have said this a long time ago. The evening sun was dropping behind the trees. Maggie sat beside me quietly, watching, waiting. Derek looked down at the grass, then back at me. You know what the worst part is? I didn't answer. He shook his head. I actually believed my own nonsense. His laugh carried no humor. I convinced myself your accomplishments didn't matter. The honesty surprised me. I told myself military service wasn't a big deal. Another pause. I told myself everybody exaggerated. His eyes became emotional. But none of that was true. For years I had imagined this moment. The apology. The admission. The acknowledgement. Now that it had arrived, it felt strangely sad. Not satisfying. Sad. Because of all the wasted years, all the family gatherings, all the unnecessary hurt. Derek continued. I think I was jealous. That caught me off guard. Jealous. He nodded. You actually did something meaningful. I stared at him. You have a family. You built a business. You've done plenty. He shook his head. That's not what I mean. The silence stretched between us. Then he said something that finally made everything make sense. When we were kids, everybody expected me to do something important. I listened. You weren't supposed to outshine me. The words sounded ridiculous. And yet they explained everything. The jokes. The mockery. The constant need to minimize my achievements. The resentment. It had never really been about the military. It had been about insecurity. Derek laughed bitterly. When you succeeded, I couldn't handle it. He looked ashamed. So I turned it into a joke. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Why now? His answer came immediately. Because Frank was right. I waited. Derek swallowed. A lot of people never came home. The words hung in the air. I spent 15 years mocking somebody who did. I felt something inside me soften. Not disappear. Not heal completely. But soften. The anger I'd carried for years suddenly felt heavier than forgiveness. And I was tired of carrying it. Very tired. Derek looked at me. I don't expect you to forgive me. I smiled slightly. Good. He laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in years. Then I stepped forward and hugged him. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The embrace wasn't magical. It didn't erase history. It didn't fix everything. But it was a beginning. Sometimes beginnings are enough. As he drove away later that evening, I sat on my porch with Maggie at my feet. The sky turned orange, then purple, then dark. For the first time since the barbecue, I felt at peace. Not because my cousin had finally apologized. Because I no longer needed his approval. A month later, life had mostly returned to normal, at least on the surface. The family group chat was active again. My aunt was planning Thanksgiving. My mother kept sending photos of flowers from her garden. My father called more often than he used to. And Derek was trying. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. Just consistently. Sometimes that's more meaningful. One Saturday morning, he showed up at my house with a toolbox. My porch steps needed repairs. I hadn't mentioned it. Apparently, he'd noticed during his last visit. For 3 hours, we worked side by side, mostly in silence. Neither of us was particularly good at emotional conversations. The Carter family had always communicated through actions. That afternoon said more than 100 apologies ever could. When we finished, Derek sat on the porch railing and looked across the yard. You know, he said, I used to think strength meant proving yourself. I handed him a bottle of water. And now, he laughed. Now I think strength is not needing to. I smiled. Tom would have appreciated that. Speaking of Tom, he became an unexpected friend after the barbecue. We met for coffee every few weeks. Talked about life, talked about aging, talked about the strange experience of carrying memories that younger people couldn't always understand. One afternoon he asked a question that stayed with me. If you could go back, would you change anything? I knew exactly what he meant. The missions, the losses, the sacrifices, the years afterward, the silence, the guilt, everything. I thought about it for a long time. Then I answered honestly, no. Tom nodded. Not because the answer was easy, because he understood it. Changing the painful parts would also erase the meaningful ones. The people we helped, the lessons we learned, the lives connected to ours, including people like Frank. A few months after the barbecue, Frank visited Tennessee. For the first time in more than 15 years, we met face to face. His grandchildren came too. 3 energetic kids who spent half the afternoon chasing Maggie around my backyard. At one point, Frank stood quietly beside me watching them play. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he smiled. Beautiful, isn't it? I followed his gaze. The children were laughing. The sun was setting. The world felt peaceful. Yeah, I said. It is. Frank nodded. That's what you saved. I looked away. Even after all those years, praise still made me uncomfortable. But this time I understood what he meant. He wasn't talking about heroics. He wasn't talking about military service. He was talking about ordinary life. Family dinners, birthdays, grandchildren, second chances. The things people often take for granted. The things that matter most. As the years passed, the story of the barbecue slowly became family legend. New relatives heard about it. Old relatives told it. The details changed a little each time. Stories tend to do that. But one part always stayed the same. The moment when a retired Navy SEAL dropped his drink. The moment when a single word changed everything. Hades. Ironically, the call sign mattered less to me than ever before. For years I thought it represented who I was. I was wrong. It represented something I had done, not who I had become. Who I had become was far more important. A daughter, a cousin, a friend, a neighbor, a woman who had finally stopped carrying other people's opinions. One evening nearly a year after the barbecue, my father and I sat together on my porch. The sun was disappearing behind the hills. We watched in comfortable silence. Eventually he spoke. You know something? What? I spent years thinking I knew my daughter. I smiled. And he laughed softly. I was only seeing part of her. The statement wasn't painful anymore. It was simply true. We all see only part of each other. The quiet neighbor. The retired veteran. The difficult cousin. The elderly man at the bar. The truth is always larger. More complicated. More human. That's why assumptions can be dangerous. They convince us we understand people we have never really taken the time to know. My cousin learned that lesson. My family learned it. And if I'm honest, so did I. Because forgiveness taught me something pride never could. Understanding someone doesn't require agreeing with everything they've done. It requires seeing the person beneath the mistakes, the person beneath the fear, the person beneath the mask. That was the real victory. Not proving Derek wrong. Not impressing my family. Not earning respect. The real victory was letting go of resentment before it became part of me. As for the old call sign, I don't hear it very often anymore. And that's all right. Some chapters belong in the past. They shaped us. They taught us. Then they let us move forward. If there's one lesson in my story, it's this. Never mistake humility for weakness. And never assume you know someone's worth based on what they choose not to say. The quietest person in the room may be carrying a story that would change the way you see the world. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life or taught you something worth remembering, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories about dignity, second chances, and the hidden strength people carry every day, consider sharing this story with someone who might need it. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.